Hey there, this is your teacher, Mr. H, and you're watching History in a Hoodie. Today's episode is about Georgia's westward expansion, where we'll learn all about Georgia's growth to today's boundaries. I can't wait to find out, so let's get this show started. What are we learning about today? The standard for today's lesson asks the students to explain reasons for the establishment of UGA and for the westward movement of Georgia's capitals. We will also look at the impact of land policies pursued by Georgia, including the headright system, land lotteries, and the Yazoo land fraud. Finally, we will explain how technological developments including railroads and the cotton gin had an impact on Georgia's growth. Before we start, let's go over some vocabulary for today's lesson. The Headright Act provided the head of a family up to 200 acres of free land in the Georgia frontier. The Yazoo land fraud was a scandal where land companies bribed members of the Georgia General Assembly for cheap land. The land lottery provided Georgians a chance to buy cheap land. The University of Georgia was the first publicly funded university in North America. The cotton gin is a mechanical device that easily removes cotton seeds from the cotton lint, making the process much quicker. During the colonial era, nearly all Georgians lived within 100 miles of the seacoast. Today, Georgia is the largest state east of the Mississippi River in terms of land area. This means that in the years following the Revolution, the state grew rapidly in size, and this expansion had some interesting causes and effects, some positive and some negative. Prior to the Revolution, Georgia's northern, eastern, and southern borders were all set. The east border was set as the Savannah River to separate South Carolina. The northern border was a direct line of latitude at 35 degrees north, and, excepting the St. Mary's River, the rest of the southern border was also a direct line of latitude at 31 degrees north. The western border was non-existent, but pretty much everyone thought it ran to the Mississippi River, which was the edge of the Louisiana Territory. Now, you should all recognize that Georgia's border doesn't come close to touching the Mississippi River today, and that has to do with the state's land policies. Georgian citizens wanted to expand rapidly into the countryside, so the government of the new state had to come up with a plan to give out the land. The first plan was the Headright Act. Under this plan, any family could receive free land, up to 200 acres. Men who fought in the Revolution or owned slaves received the most land. Too many families applied for the Headright system, and it was shut down before the state ran out of land. The second plan was the Yazoo Act. Yazoo is the name of a river in present-day Alabama, but was within the claimed territory of Georgia at the time period. The government of Georgia sold much of the land in the West to companies for bribes of $500,000. This bribery scandal, known as the Yazoo land fraud, was Georgia's first big disgrace. Honest politicians took over the state's legislature and nullified the Yazoo Act. Later on, the state would sell the territory back to the U.S. government, which is why Georgia doesn't also include Alabama and Mississippi territory to this day. The final approach to giving out new land was the land lottery system. People would submit their names to the state and pay a small amount for a ticket. The name would be entered into a lottery drum and randomly selected to gain a large amount of land for almost nothing. Over 3/4 of Georgia's land was given out in land lotteries that over 100,000 families won. Georgia's growth westward meant changes for the state. Having the state's capital in Savannah on the coast no longer made any sense when over 90% of the state's population lived further inland. Georgia would ultimately have 5 state capitals in its history, easy to remember with the SALMA acronym: Savannah, Augusta, Louisville, Milledgeville, and finally Atlanta. Each time the state capital was moved, the goal was for it to be closer to the center of the state's population as the population expanded west. Remember, no telephones or telegraphs, cars or airplanes quite yet. If a person had business with the government, it meant traveling to the state capital. So, a centrally located capital made a lot of sense. All this growth also meant that Georgia was due for an institution of higher learning. The University of Georgia came out of Georgia's expansion period, the state's first college in 1785. UGA was headed by Abraham Baldwin, a famous name you should recognize because he was a signer of the Declaration of Independence. So what? Can technological inventions have both intended and unintended consequences? Prior to the Revolution, Georgia's main source of agricultural production was rice. It would have been cotton, however, the process of picking cotton was very, very difficult. The cotton plant must be carefully removed from the plant, and then the individual seeds must be picked out of the fibers themselves, a very time and labor-intensive process. In 1793, Eli Whitney, an inventor, built the first cotton gin. The gin was a mechanical tool to easily remove the seeds from the cotton fibers, speeding up the process by producing cotton by many times. Cotton was already in demand across the nation and world, so speeding up the process meant the opportunity to produce much, much more cotton. The only holdup was the picking step, which could be solved by more slaves. As the cotton gin became widely used across the American South, slavery grew enormously. Cotton became king in the state. No other agricultural crop could net as much profit, and nearly every farm and plantation across Georgia was planting at least a majority of their fields with cotton. Georgia's economy rapidly grew due to cotton, Whitney's cotton gin, and the expansion of slavery. In 1781, James Watt patented the steam engine, which would eventually lead to the first railroads shortly after. Many small towns and cities began to grow up alongside these first rail tracks, just as earlier towns and cities grew up along rivers. Easy access to transportation, trade, and resources. The Georgia General Assembly planned to build the Western and Atlantic Railroad, running from Savannah toward Chattanooga and further north. The original endpoint was in northwestern Georgia, and first known as Terminus. A few years later, a small town named Marthasville grew up on the spot that was later renamed for the railroad, Atlanta. Being centrally located and right on a railroad, Atlanta would be named Georgia's fifth and final state capital. Georgia's expansion meant taking over lands that Georgian people hadn't lived in before, but that land wasn't empty. The Cherokee and Creek tribes' homeland were found in the western part of the state that the state legislature was so rapidly and freely, almost, giving away. This conflict will come more into focus in the next video, and the consequences of it are significant for Georgia's native peoples. Now what? What am I going to do with this information? The word consequence probably has a negative sound to you, but it really only means the result of an action. There can be positive consequences and negative ones as well, of course. Today I'm interested in talking about unintended consequences. Both the pleasant surprises that you weren't expecting and the disappointing results that you never imagined occurring. By now, you should realize that every action you take has effects. Every decision has consequences. I presume that the majority of you are striving for those effects and consequences to be positive. But part of growing up is trying to understand what those consequences could possibly be. I can't tell you the number of meetings that your teachers have sat in trying to think through the decisions and make the best choice based on how other people, like students, parents, and administrators, would react to that decision. Government leaders, business executives, employees, parents, and all types of people think through their decisions every day to try and pick the best outcome. The opposite of being considerate and thoughtful is being impulsive, which means acting without thinking at all. Sometimes impulsive decision-making results in effects that are positive or neutral, but most of the time, impulsivity ends up with negative results. If you want to become a successful teenager, and later on a successful adult, one lesson you must understand is to think through your decisions, actions, and words ahead of time for the best result. You may stumble here and there because experience is an important part of being able to make good decisions all the time, but at least trying to make the right decisions is always recognized as a win. Wow, so learning about the growth of Georgia is really important for us to understand. I'm glad we learned it today. Are you ready for some review questions? Why was Georgia's capital moved to Louisville? As more settlers moved into Georgia, the capital moved several times. The first capital was Savannah, followed by... Which statement describes the controversy surrounding the Yazoo land fraud? According to the graph, the relationship between slave population and cotton production was... Why was Eli Whitney's invention of the cotton gin important? I hope all of you learned a lot from today's episode of History in a Hoodie about Georgia's westward expansion. If you did, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Just kidding, I don't care about that stuff. But do make sure you study this lesson. Bye now.